Nestled in the quiet charm of Scarsdale, New York, the former residence of actress Joan Bennett is an unassuming colonial-style house, its classic façade hiding decades of eerie tales. The house, built in the early 1900s, was home to Bennett during the height of her Hollywood career, but it has since become known for its inexplicable phenomena. The current owners, a young couple who moved in 3 years ago, were drawn to the house's elegance and storied history. From the beginning, they were intrigued by whispers of its connection to the golden age of Hollywood, but thought little of the rumors of supernatural occurrences. That changed one chilly November evening. They were in the living room when the unmistakable sound of a piano drifted through the air. It was a faint, melancholy melody, like a forgotten waltz. At first, they thought it was coming from outside, but when they stepped onto the porch, the night was silent. Back inside, the music continued its source unclear. The couple later learned from a neighbor that Joan Bennett had kept a grand piano in the parlor, where she would often play during her quieter years. The piano, however, had been sold decades earlier. The strangeness did not end there. Over the following months, the owners began noticing fleeting glimpses of a figure in the upstairs hallway. It was always the same. A light, feminine silhouette, as though someone were passing from one room to another. The figure never lingered, nor did it seem malevolent, it simply was. On one occasion, the husband followed the figure into a room, only to find it empty. "It's like she's pacing," he later told a friend. "Almost as if she's waiting for someone." Curious about the history of their home, the couple delved into old records and personal accounts from Bennett's time there. A story emerged of Bennett hosting small gatherings where she entertained guests with her piano playing. According to some, the house was her refuge, a place where she could escape the pressures of Hollywood. It was also where she reportedly struggled with loneliness after her third marriage ended. Some visitors to the house claim they feel an overwhelming sense of sadness in the hallway where the silhouette appears. Others swear they've heard a soft humming, as though someone were trying to recall the melody of an old tune. Whether these occurrences are echoes of Joan Bennett herself or simply the result of the home's long history, the current owners have come to accept them as part of their lives. "It's not scary," the wife said in an interview. "If anything, it feels like the house is alive, like it remembers her." Visitors to the house often leave with more questions than answers. Is the music a trace of Bennett's artistry, lingering in the ether? Is the figure in the hallway an imprint of a life once lived, or something more? Whatever the truth, Joan Bennett's house remains a place where the line between past and present feels tantalizingly thin. One evening in mid-October, the wife was folding laundry in the upstairs bedroom when the familiar sound of piano notes began to waft through the air. Unlike previous instances, this time the melody wasn't faint or distant. It was vivid and deliberate, each note resonating with the precision of a live performance. She froze, the laundry slipping from her hands, and listened. It wasn't just the piano, there was something else. A low hum, almost like someone quietly singing along, blended with the music. Her heart raced. The sound was coming from directly below her, in what had once been the parlor. Unable to resist, she tiptoed down the stairs. The creaking would beneath her feet barely audible over the music. When she reached the doorway of the parlor, her breath caught in her throat. The room was empty, as it always was, but the air felt charged. The sound stopped abruptly, leaving a deafening silence in its wake. For the first time, she noticed the faintest scent of lavender lingering in the air, a perfume so delicate it could have been imagined. Later that night, she discovered that lavender was Joan Bennett's signature fragrance, often mentioned in old interviews. The next day, the husband decided to test a theory. He set up an old voice recorder in the hallway upstairs, hoping to capture evidence of the figure they'd both seen. For hours, the device ran, recording the ambient noise of the house. Distant traffic, the occasional groan of settling wood, and their footsteps as they moved about. When they played the recording back that evening, most of it was uneventful until the final 5 minutes. A faint tapping sound echoed through the playback, like someone walking slowly in high heels across a hardwood floor. Then came something that made the couple exchange uneasy glances. A whispered voice. It was faint, almost inaudible, but unmistakably feminine. The words were hard to make out, though the tone was one of quiet urgency. "I'm here. Don't." The sentence cut off abruptly, leaving them staring at the recorder in stunned silence. A week later, an old friend of the couple came to stay with them. She was an artist and had always been skeptical of their stories. That skepticism vanished one morning when she came downstairs, pale and shaken. "I saw her," the friend said, her voice trembling. She described waking up in the middle of the night and glancing toward the antique mirror mounted in the guest room. Reflected in its glass, she saw a woman standing at the foot of her bed. The woman was dressed in a pale, flowing gown, her expression unreadable. The artist turned to look, but there was no one there, only the empty room. Yet, when she looked back into the mirror, the figure remained, as if it belonged to another world entirely. By the time she worked up the courage to move, the figure had already faded. The artist left that afternoon, making excuses about an urgent project but later confessing she could no longer sleep in the house. The final straw came when the couple decided to investigate the small storage closet off the parlor. They rarely used it, as the old door had a habit of sticking, but something about its presence had begun to unsettle them. On the night they finally opened it, the house seemed unusually quiet. The piano hadn't played in days, and even the figure in the hallway hadn't appeared. Inside the closet was a collection of dusty boxes filled with memorabilia. Old photos, yellowing sheet music, and a single diary bound in cracked leather. The wife reached for the diary, but as her hand closed around it, the door to the parlor slammed shut behind them with a force that made them jump. A deep chill filled the room, and for the first time they felt something close to fear. They both turned toward the source of the chill, the corner where the piano once stood. Although it was empty, a faint imprint of dust on the floor suggested something had been there recently. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. The couple retreated to the kitchen, clutching the diary as if it were a forbidden artifact. The wife carefully opened it, revealing delicate handwriting in fading ink. Each entry seemed to dance between mundane details of daily life and cryptic musings that hinted at something darker. One passage, dated June 14, 1949, stood out. "The music keeps me grounded, reminds me who I am, but there are nights when it feels as though the notes don't belong to me. They come unbidden from somewhere I don't understand. And sometimes, I swear I hear a second melody beneath my own, as though someone is playing along with me, someone unseen." The couple read in silence, the words pressing on them like a weight. They turned to the final page, dated only weeks before Joan Bennett moved out of the house. The writing was hurried and uneven, as though scrawled in a frenzy. "I cannot stay. The house refuses to let me go, yet it grows more restless by the day. I feel her watching me in the mirrors, listening to the music. But who is she? Is she even real? Or is she me?" They stopped reading. The words seemed to hum in the air around them, filling the silence with an unspoken tension. Later that night, as they tried to sleep, the wife woke with a start. She wasn't sure what had roused her, but a prickling sensation ran down her spine. Glancing toward the bedroom door, she noticed it was slightly ajar, though she was certain she had closed it before going to bed. The hallway beyond was dark, but there was a faint, flickering light that seemed to pulse, like a candle flame swaying in the wind. Unable to resist, she got out of bed and crept toward the door. The light was coming from the end of the hallway, near the staircase. As she approached, she heard a sound soft and rhythmic, like the swish of fabric against the floor. It was the unmistakable sound of someone moving, yet she saw no one. The light led her downstairs, where it vanished abruptly at the threshold of the parlor. Standing there, she felt an overwhelming sense of being watched. The air felt heavier, colder. And then, she heard it again, the piano. This time, the notes were slow and deliberate, a haunting melody that seemed to pull her closer. She stepped into the room, her bare feet pressing against the cold wood. The music stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The room was empty, save for the faint scent of lavender, which seemed to cling to her skin. Turning to leave, She caught sight of her reflection in the large mirror hanging above the mantel. But something was wrong. In the glass, her reflection wasn't alone. The next morning, the husband found her sitting at the kitchen table, pale and quiet. She didn't tell him what she'd seen in the mirror, how, for the briefest moment, the figure beside her had looked almost identical to herself, except for the eyes. They were darker, emptier, as if staring out from another time. Later that day, the couple decided to return the diary to the closet. But when they opened the door, the space was empty. The boxes, the photos, the sheet music, everything they had found the night before was gone. In its place was something else. A single yellowed page lying flat on the floor. Written in the same delicate handwriting as the diary were just 4 words. "Finish what I began." Neither of them knew what it meant, but they couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had started in the house wasn't done with them yet. That night, the piano played again. This time, the melody was fuller, richer, as though it had found its missing harmony. But it wasn't just the music that filled the house. For the first time, they heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, descending the stairs toward their room. The footsteps paused at the bottom of the stairs, as if whoever or whatever was descending was deciding its next move. The couple huddled together in their bedroom, hearts pounding as the silence stretched out. And then, with a chilling certainty, the sound resumed. Each step was deliberate, echoing down the hallway and stopping directly outside their door. The wife reached for her husband's hand, her grip trembling. "Did you lock the door?" she whispered. He shook his head, his eyes fixed on the doorknob. For a moment, it seemed to turn ever so slightly, as though someone on the other side was testing it. The music started again, faint and distant, as if it were coming from deep within the walls of the house. It wasn't the haunting waltz they had heard before, but something slower, more fragmented, like a melody that had been forgotten and was now struggling to take shape. When the music stopped, the doorknob stilled. The air felt electric, charged with a presence that neither of them could see but both could feel. And then, as quickly as it had begun, the moment passed. The house fell silent again. The next day, the couple decided to confront whatever was happening. They began exploring the house more thoroughly, checking every corner for hidden spaces or forgotten relics. It was in the attic, buried under a tarp and layers of dust, that they found it. A portrait of Joan Bennett. The painting was striking. Bennett's piercing gaze seemed to follow them as they moved, her lips curved in a faint, enigmatic smile. But what truly unsettled them was the background. Behind her was a mirror, and in the mirror's reflection stood another figure, vague and shadowy, but undeniably present. Beneath the painting was a plaque engraved with a single word: Requiem. Later that evening, emboldened by their discovery, they decided to explore the basement, a space they had avoided since moving in. The stairs creaked under their weight, and the air grew colder with each step. The basement was mostly bare, with only a few old shelves and a workbench. But in the far corner, something caught their attention. A door. The door was small and unassuming, almost easy to miss. It was painted the same color as the basement walls, as though it had been deliberately concealed. They tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The wife found a crowbar among the tools and pried it open. The door gave way with a groan, revealing a narrow passageway. The walls of the passage were lined with faded wallpaper, and at the end was a small room. Inside there was an old chair, a writing desk, and, impossibly, a piano. It was a small upright model, its surface covered in a thick layer of dust. The keys, however, were pristine, as if someone had been playing them recently. On the desk was another yellowed piece of paper. Written in the same delicate handwriting as before were the words, "The mirror holds the truth." The couple returned to the parlor, where the large mirror hung above the mantel. It had always unnerved them, but now it seemed to vibrate with a strange energy. The husband leaned in closer, his breath fogging the glass. For a moment, all he saw was his own reflection. Then the image shifted. Instead of their reflection, the mirror showed the small room in the basement. The piano was there, but this time the keys were moving, as if being played by invisible hands. In the corner of the room stood a figure, a woman in a pale gown, her face obscured but her posture unmistakable. "Do you see her?" the wife whispered. "Yes," the husband replied, his voice barely audible. "But she's not looking at us. She's looking past us." They turned as one, and in the dim light of the parlor, they saw her. A faint, shimmering silhouette standing just beyond the doorway. She didn't move, didn't speak, but the air around her seemed to hum with unspoken words. And then, as they watched in horrified awe, she raised a hand and pointed toward the mirror. The glass began to ripple. The moment the figure pointed toward the mirror, the air thickened, and a low hum filled the room. The couple stood frozen, unable to look away. The reflection in the mirror rippled like water disturbed by a stone, distorting the image of the figure in the basement. She seemed to lean forward, her face becoming clearer, revealing features that were hauntingly familiar yet not quite human. The wife's breath hitched as she recognized the woman in the mirror. It was her, but it wasn't. The face that stared back at her had eyes that shimmered like dark pools, depthless and infinite. The woman's lips moved, and though no sound came from her, the wife felt the words in her mind. "You're here to finish what I started." Before she could react, the air around them grew colder, and the sound of footsteps, those same slow, deliberate steps, echoed through the house. The couple turned to find that the parlor was now darker, the shadows deepening, as if the house itself were absorbing the light. The figure in the mirror slowly stepped forward, its hands reaching out as if trying to break through the glass. The wife reached for her husband's arm, but as she touched him, a coldness seeped into her skin, a coldness that felt like it was coming from inside her. Suddenly, the piano in the parlor began to play again, but this time, the notes were sharp, discordant, almost violent. The music seemed to claw at their minds, pulling them toward the room at the far end of the house, the room with the piano they had found in the basement. The woman in the mirror was still staring at them, her eyes pleading now, her movements frantic as though trying to warn them. Without thinking, they both found themselves drawn to the basement. Each step down the stairs felt heavier than the last, as if the house was trying to keep them from moving. When they reached the door to the small room, they hesitated. The light from the flickering bulb above them cast long shadows across the walls, and for a moment, they thought they saw something move in the corner of their vision. They opened the door. The room was the same, empty, save for the piano, the chair, and the desk. But as they stepped inside, the temperature dropped even further. They both turned toward the piano, where the keys now moved on their own, faster and faster, as though an invisible force was playing. The music was frantic now, louder and somehow wrong. The chords clashed against each other, dissonant and jagged, like the house itself was trying to scream. And then, as if to answer the madness of the music, the wife saw something out of the corner of her eye, movement, fluid, like a shadow weaving in and out of the room. The figure from the mirror, the woman, was there, standing by the desk. Her presence filled the space, the coldness of her form seeping into their skin, making their breaths shallow. "Finish it," the figure whispered, her voice a soft, echoing murmur. It was the same voice they had heard on the recording, the same voice that had whispered through the night. The wife stepped toward the desk, drawn to the paper that lay atop it. There were no words this time, only symbols, strange and intricate, scrawled hastily across the page. The symbols seemed to shift as she stared at them, changing their form, bending and twisting into shapes that didn't belong in this world. She reached out to touch them, her fingers trembling. As soon as her skin brushed the paper, a sharp pain shot through her, like a jolt of electricity, and the room seemed to warp around her. The piano's discordant tune grew louder, as though it was tearing the fabric of reality itself. The woman in the corner of the room smiled, or at least, the figure that resembled her smiled, though the smile felt wrong, twisted like a mask slipping from her face. Suddenly, the air was filled with a sound that wasn't music at all, a shrill, high-pitched ringing that pierced through their skulls. The figure raised her hands, and with a final, desperate cry, the wife understood. It wasn't just the music that needed to be finished. It was the story, the unfinished, tortured history of the house. The woman's soul had been trapped here for decades, and the music had been her way of calling out for someone, anyone, to complete the ritual she had started so long ago. They had thought they were just hearing the echoes of a past long gone. But now it was clear. The echoes weren't from the past, they were alive, reaching out, attempting to break free. And as the woman's hands stretched toward them once again, the wife knew that there was no escape from what had already begun. In that moment, everything went still. The piano's maddening tune stopped, and the air thickened with the weight of history. The wife stood frozen, her fingers still trembling against the symbols on the page, as the figure in the corner approached them. The woman's face, now fully visible, was no longer just a reflection. Her eyes, dark and hollow, locked onto the wife's with an intensity that felt as though they were staring directly into her soul. The room seemed to breathe, the walls creaking in time with the beating of their hearts. "You must complete it," the figure whispered again, her voice a hollow echo that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "The music, it must be finished." The wife nodded, her mind clouded, her body moving without her command. She sat at the piano, her hands falling instinctively to the keys. With a deep breath, she began to play. The melody started soft, uncertain, but soon began to flow smooth and haunting. As her fingers danced across the keys, the room around them seemed to darken, and the shadows in the corners of the room began to shift. The figure stood beside her, watching, waiting. As the final, perfect note echoed through the house, the mirror in the parlor shattered with a violent crack, and the figure in the room faded. The coldness that had gripped them for so long lifted, leaving only a profound silence. The piano fell still. The house was silent, save for the distant sound of wind rustling the trees outside. The couple stood in the basement, the weight of the moment settling over them. They looked around, but the figure was gone. The house at last seemed at peace. But as they turned to leave, the wife caught one last glimpse of the mirror in the parlor, still intact. For a moment, she thought she saw her own reflection smile back at her. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.